Two Christians can agree on almost everything and still become enemies over one question. Both say theology has to return to the sources, and both mean it. And they still cannot agree on what the sources are. One means Scripture alone, the other means Scripture and the ongoing teaching of the Church. And even among others who accept tradition, nobody agrees where tradition stops. At Nicaea, at the break between Rome and Constantinople, at Trent, maybe. Nowhere at all, perhaps, because it never stops. Before a single verse gets interpreted, before a single doctrine gets weighed, there is already a war over what counts as evidence. That is the argument Bernard Lonergan has to deal with in Chapter 6 of Mediated Theology, and he deals with it in 3 pages. Episode 5 ended with a question, stated exactly like this. What exactly counts as data for theology? And how do we gather it well? As the last episode sketched, research is the first of the 8 specialties. It makes available the data relevant to theological investigation. General research locates ancient sites, catalogs manuscripts, prepares critical editions, builds indices and bibliographies, and someday, Lonergan speculates, a complete information retrieval system. Special research assembles the data relevant to one particular question. That was the map drawn in the last episode. Chapter 6 does not redraw it. It does something the map could not do. It tells you who actually does this work. And it tells you which data theology is even allowed to call its own. So, Lonergan opens by refusing something you might expect. A manual. A set of precise instructions for doing research. He will not give you one. His reasoning is actually quite direct. Doing research, he says, is much more a matter of practice than of theory. And that may sound like evasion, but it's not evasion. It's a claim about the kind of knowledge research actually is. Some knowledge lives in a book. Some knowledge only lives in a pair of trained hands. So, instead of procedures, he gives 2 paths. General research, find the masters wherever they work, and go to them. Work alongside them until you know every tool they use, the apprenticeship model. His phrase for the goal is exact until you understand precisely why they make their each and every move, right? So that's general research. Then there's special research. Here the order flips. First, choose which of the other specialties your research is going to serve. Interpretation, history, doctrines, whichever it is. Then find the master who researches on that basis. Join his seminar. Write your dissertation under his direction. So not a formula, not a syllabus, 2 apprenticeships, not 1. Because research, general or special, he says, is always a concrete task, guided not by abstract generalities, but by the practical intelligence of the same self-correcting process by which we acquire what we call common sense. That is a research chapter grounding itself in the very thing that teaches a child to walk and talk. It's common sense hard won. So, what will Lonergan give us, if not a manual? He will tell us which areas of data theological research is even allowed to investigate. But he draws a line around what that settles, indicating those areas, he insists, decides only a methodical question, never a theological one. Not who is right only how the working gets organized. That is a serious act of restraint. He begins with 4 studies, all concerned with the same subject, man. Human studies, religious studies, Christian studies, Roman Catholic studies. Each is broader or narrower than the last, depending on how wide a field of data it treats as relevant. Human studies and religious studies he sets aside for a later chapter. His concern here is narrower and sharper. That is, how do Christians themselves disagree about the data relevant to Christian theology? And that may not sound new, and that's because the issue is not new. Is theology based on Scripture alone, sola scriptura, or on Scripture and tradition? And if tradition, is tradition just the explicit teaching of the apostles, or the ongoing teaching of the church? Ongoing up to when? Up to Nicaea, like I said? Up to the break between Rome and Constantinople? Up into the councils that received scholastic doctrine? Up to Trent? Up to the 19th century? Or forever? Centuries. Centuries of argument compressed into 6 clauses. Not all answers can be correct, he says. And that should stop you in your tracks, because it means Lonergan is not a relativist here. Somebody is wrong about the boundary of tradition. But the correct answer, he adds, will not be reached until the 6th specialty, Doctrines. And here's the trap. How can you reach Doctrines, the 6th specialty, if you do not already know which areas of data are relevant and how heavily each area should be weighted? You would need the answer to begin, right? And you cannot have the answer until the end. That is the bootstrap problem sitting at the center of this 3-page chapter. And Lonergan's answer is one of the most, I think, quietly confident passages in the entirety of the volume. My answer, he says, is to let Christian theologians begin from where they already stand. Each will consider one or more areas relevant to theological research. Let him work there. He will find what the method is designed. He will take care of the matter, right? Begin where you already stand. That is not some sort of indifference to truth. That is confidence in the method. But confidence needs a reason, or it is just optimism wearing a collar, right? So Lonergan gives us one. Christian theologians do not only disagree about the areas of research, they disagree on the interpretation of the texts, on the occurrence of events, on the significance of movements. But not every disagreement, he says, has the same root. Some differences dissolve as research. Interpretation and history simply make more progress. And he has names for it. The healing office of time. Some differences come from something deeper than error, disparate cultures, diverse differentiations of consciousness. And those are not settled by winning an argument, but by being bridged by transposition, by working out how one culture's meaning translates into another's. And some difference, he says plainly, exists because intellectual or moral or religious conversion has not occurred. And those are not solved by research at all. They belong to 2 later specialties, dialectic and foundations, whose task is to bring the difference out into the open so that people of goodwill can find each other. 3 different routes, 3 different remedies. That is why beginning where you stand is not naive. It's not just to placate, because the method already has a place assigned for every kind of disagreement that you are going to meet, that you will inevitably meet. And Lonergan closes the chapter with one more admission. The traffic runs both directions. His closing line is one of the most practical in the whole book. The method is not just one-way street, right? The various specialties interact with one another. If a theologian reaches doctrines and changes his mind about which areas of data actually matter, he does not simply publish a correction. He goes back and changes his practice and research. 3 pages and the honesty is total. Lonergan will not hand you a manual. He will not hand you a verdict on scripture and tradition. What he hands you is permission to start and a promise that starting will not be wasted. So let's bring this short chapter together. Research gathers the data. It does not decide what any of it means. Lonergan will not teach you procedures because procedures are not what research runs on. He will not settle scripture against tradition because that verdict belongs to a later specialty. He will not let the size of an old disagreement frighten you out of working because he has already sorted every kind of disagreement into a place where it gets handled. Begin where you stand. The method takes care of the rest. And in the next episode, we move to interpretation because once data is gathered, cataloged, edited, sitting in front of you, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly did the person who wrote it mean?